I hosted a $50 budget deck building competition, and I will buy the winner's deck for them. We will rate each deck out of 10, and the person with the highest total wins.
I'm Noctamoon Archives on YouTube. I'm also known on Reddit for being the Minotaur reviewer, the guy that you come to tell you whether a new Minotaur card is good and if it's playable within the Minotaur tribe.
I'm Colin, the Mana Confluence on YouTube. I make YouTube videos about all different types of Magic, from Brawl to some arena content. I like to do openings and random buys, and I like Commander a lot as well.
First, from Eric Dragon Highlander, Nils Pillowfort. 2 and a white for legendary creature, Human Cleric. At the beginning of your end step for each player, put a +1/+1 counter on up to one target creature that player controls. Each creature with one or more counters on it can't attack you or planeswalkers you control unless its controller pays X, where X is the number of counters on that creature. $53, which is close enough to be allowed.
Looking at the list, it immediately seems like a really unique concept. Like, I haven't seen too many other decks like this.
Yeah, what I really like about this deck is that it seems to cover all of its bases. Like, it knows how to go wide, go big, be defensive if your game plan isn't going its way. Because Nil makes it harder to be attacked by your opponents, but he's also got the pillow effects to make that even harder. So he has the ability to rebuild himself if a big board wipe comes his way.
Yeah, he just puts counters on like the opponent's stuff, which is a really uncommon strategy. I don't think I've seen that before. He can make tons of tokens and start attacking himself and pivot to putting counters on his own creatures if it's going well.
Yeah, what I think is holding this deck back though, his section for combat. Like, he has a lot of cards that give keywords to his other creatures, and I feel like there's a lot of redundancy amongst his lords, which is fine for like increasing the odds of drawing into them, but if you already have one on the field, then the lord you just drew is kind of redundant and just a dead card.
Yeah, the ramp also. There's 6 pieces of ramp.
I think that and the draw category as well. I'm only seeing 5 things of card draw. I think maybe something like Secret Rendezvous could be almost synergistic in this deck because you're giving your opponents counters, so you could also give them cards and maybe try to politic. Having more than 5 sources of card draw would be an upgrade I'd like to see for the deck.
The winning of this, right? It's so spread out across like protecting yourself and like, it'd be hard to attack and actually win just by slowly building up the counters.
I think overall I would give this deck an 8 out of 10. Considering the budget constraints, this seems like a really good list.
I'm gonna go with a 7.
Yeah, I agree with Griffin. I think I'm also going to go with a 7. I like the list. I think it's really unique. I'd like to see it a bit more focused and have a bit more rampant card draw, which can be difficult.
Gives this a 22. There's also a video on this. I'll link it below if you want to watch it. Kodama of the East Tree and Kraum Ludovic Opus. Kraum is 3 blue-red for 4/4 flying haste. Whenever an opponent casts his or her second spell each turn, draw a card. And Kodama, 4 green-green for 6/6 with reach. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put onto the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card with equal or lesser converted mana cost from your hand onto the battlefield. These are some high CMC commanders. This is from Toaster, official price $41.49.
So this one, when I looked at it, seemed a little weird to me. It's very focused on one game plan where you're trying to like combo off with Kodama and like impact tremors, and everything else on the list seems very much about like incidental advantage stuff through landfall. I'm not quite sure why Ludovic is in this list other than giving access to blue and red, because he doesn't really seem to synergize at all with what the deck's doing here.
It's either that or Ludovic Necro Alchemist. 1 blue-red at the beginning of each player's end step. That player may draw a card if a player other than you lost life this turn.
If you're trying to combo off, I'd guess that probably wouldn't be optimal. You don't want to give your opponents the resources to stop your combo.
True, but it's a lot cheaper and it still draws you cards. I could see it either way.
This deck does have a few other good things in its deck. Omnath, Locus of Rage here. You've got the Baylofts, you've got Morag. Even if you can't get get your combo, those cards themselves are often enough able to win you games.
He says it provides over 1,000 different infinites. Where did that number come from?
I find that difficult to believe that there are 1,000 ways to go infinite here.
I think it's worth taking into account, though, that this deck is almost $10 below the limit. Personally, pretty impressed by the fact that this is a $40 deck that has the capability of going infinite so many different ways.
Well, sure, but Kodama itself is a big part of that, I think.
And that's another downside of this deck is you have to get that commander out before you can do a lot.
Yeah, I think if this deck is gonna win, it's gonna mostly be part of how well you can politics your table. Land manipulation isn't gonna win you the games, but it's gonna keep you alive.
Plus you can say, oh, this is a $50 budget deck, don't worry. Then just combo off and win.
Yeah. This deck is maybe a 6 out of 10 because of how focused it is on doing stuff with the commander and just trying to stay alive. It doesn't feel very proactive.
7, because I feel like it's slightly better than the last one, but the last one was mono white and more expensive.
I think I'm going to go with a 6 on this list. I think the mono white one was a bit more unique. I appreciate the fact that this can go infinite in a $40 budget list. There are a lot of other decks that can go infinite in similar ways, where the mono white deck was something I had really not seen too much of before.
Hanna, Ship's Navigator. 1 white blue for a 1/2. 1 blue tap. Return target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. And the official price for this one is $52.51.
So I'm gonna have to be upfront and say this is the deck that I like the least of everything we look at today. It seems all over the place in what it's trying to do. It's like split in the middle between caring about artifacts and caring about enchantments. So you have cards that are all in on the enchantment game plan and cards all in on the artifact game plan, but those artifact and enchantments, they don't really mix with each other in what they're trying to do. So the deck just feels all over the place and is unfocused.
You need to pick one theme and commit to that.
33 lands seems a little low to me.
But it has a lot of artifacts there to fill in the ramp.
I think one thing that stands out, there's not too much that surprises me. When I look at Hanna, these feel like a lot of safe includes, but they don't seem necessarily focused.
Yeah, I think I have to give this one a 4 out of 10.
I'm gonna give it 3.5.
I'm going to be the mean one here and give it a 3 out of 10.
So that's a total of 10.5. Endrek sahr, 4 and a black for 2/2. Whenever you cast a creature spell, put X 1/1 black Thrall creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. When you control 7 or more Thralls, sacrifice Endrek sahr, Master Breeder. And this is 38-33. I think this is a great choice for a commander because it just gets so much power out with any creature you cast. So even the cheap, not as good creatures still make tons of Thralls, which can help carry the deck.
Yeah, I could tell immediately when I saw Endrek's ability that this deck is going to be an oppressive aristocrat list because just playing your normal creatures makes you more creatures to throw in the meat grinder.
I like how the deck has the win cons laid out in a separate way as well, so it's very easy to see what the strategy for winning is.
Even if you don't have your sack outlets around, just being able to make a whole bunch of tokens makes it very difficult to be attacked.
Yeah, there's a lot of sack outlets. I would say too many. 12 is a lot, especially because a lot of these aren't the best options.
Yeah, some of the ones where it just gives a temporary buff don't seem ideal, but if you're relying on your win cons to drain people out, you kind of need a critical mass of ways to get rid of your stuff. Yeah, overall, I think this deck, in my opinion, is looking like a 9.
An 8.5.
I'm going to give this deck an 8.
That is our new first place. Next is Omnath, red, green, white, blue for a 4/4. When it enters, draw a card. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life. If this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn, if it's the second time, add red, green, white, blue. If it's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you control. The official price for Omnath is $44.24. The good thing about Omnath is it's just a very powerful commander. It can carry a deck, but it's also pretty expensive.
Yeah, this deck, it looks pretty solid. Almost every single creature has an enter the battlefield trigger, or itself will flicker your creatures on top of all your other flickering abilities. So there's definitely a lot of value to be derived from this list. But what's weird to me, why is Omnath the pilot here? We have Rune, the Hidden Realm, in the deck list. Why isn't he the commander? Because I don't see the added red mana really doing much here.
Kind of split between landfall like a bit and then mostly flicker. Like if you just pick one, it'd be a lot better.
Like points on creativity for choosing Omnath over Rune, but I don't see any benefit from making that decision.
I actually like the decision to go into red. I feel like it pushes the boundary of what flicker is normally a bit, and I also like the Zada type effects. I would have liked to see red leaned into a bit more though. There is only a few red cards in the list. I think there's some pretty unique and cool red effects that I think could be abused.
Yeah, like Feather's inclusion here is really interesting, but most of the other red cards here I don't think are really pulling their weight to be included in a flicker list.
There's also not very many ETB get a land card effects. If you flicker your ETB get a land, you get a land, and then you get the Omnath trigger. And so that's a good way to meld them if you really do want to combine the two themes.
This deck also is lacking in removal. If you're playing this deck, you don't really have any way to interact with your opponent's stuff here. You're just relying on your flickers.
It is only running one board wipe as well, which could be an issue.
In like higher power levels, running 1 or 0 board wipes is fine, but when we're talking about budget or lower power decks, then board wipes become much more effective.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give this one 6.5.
I'm gonna give it a 5.5.
I'm gonna give this deck a 6.
So that's a total of 18. The official price for $50 man lands is $45.73, which is the most expensive deck. But on Moxfield, when they were brewing it, it said $50.
I'll allow it.
Sek'kuar, Deathkeeper, 2 black, red, green for 4/3, legendary creature Orc Shaman. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put up 3/1 black and red Graveborn creature token with haste onto the battlefield.
So one of the cards I find most interesting in this deck is Thermopod. I have not seen that before, so I always like a deck that can use cards I've never seen before.
And that's good too in this deck. Sack a creature, add red.
I mean, contrasting it with what we saw with Endrek, this seems a little weird to me. Like I'm not sure what the deck's trying to do. Is it trying to go on the aristocrat strategy, or is it trying to be like a mix of aristocrat and aggro? When you kill the creature, you get the 3/1 elemental. So is that what their game plan is, to leverage the amount of elementals you can make?
Well, there's no like actual aristocrats, which is like you sack a creature, it deals damage to opponents. So I think they're trying to go for the attack. But then there's also the weird landfall cards here. This is trying to make tons of creatures, sacrifice tons of creatures, and it's trying to attack. It's already too many things to balance. You don't need to add landfall on top of that.
I think the deck might be trying to animate your lands with cards like Living Lands and then sacrifice them in order to win the game and sort of combo out. But it's almost difficult for me to judge the deck in that fashion, because I think it's one of the lists where I would have to play it to fully understand how all the different cards work together.
If I had to guess, like the main game plan is like using Living Lands, Impact Tremors, Goblin Bombardment, and maybe Lysolda the Blood Witch in addition to the commander. But yeah, it's difficult to tell what exactly I'm supposed to be doing with this list.
There's just too many things that have to go right at the same time. I'm gonna rate this a 6.5 out of 10.
I think I'll go with 5.5.
I'm gonna give this a 7.
That's 19 total. Dragonshift under 50. The official price of this list, $33.37. So this is the cheapest deck. Esior, Wordwing Familiar is 1 blue for a 1/3 with flying. Spells your opponents cast that target 1 or more of your commanders you control, cost 3 more to cast. And Kedis, Emberclaw Familiar, is 1 and a red for a 1/1. Whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent.
So this deck was really fun to figure out at first, because I looked through the list, think, okay, they care about casting 2 or more spells or just casting spells in general. When I came to Dragonshift, the namesake of the deck, everything clicked in place, because Dragonshift will turn your creatures into 4/4 blue-red dragon until end of turn, but it has the ability to overload. So the whole point of this deck here is to use the various creatures who create tokens when you cast spells, and then turn all those into 4/4 dragons to win in a blowout.
Wow. So then you just try and make tokens by casting spells.
Yeah, like Murmuring Mystic is the big one, I think, for making stuff out of your spells.
Young Pyromancer, Talrand, pretty cool idea. It just struggles in lower budget because you have to find Dragonshift.
Yeah, that's the one point I was going to make. I wish there were more ways to get Dragonshift. It's 1 card in 100, and I don't see any extra ways to find it in this list.
In budget, transmute cards are excellent for tutoring in budget because they can get a specific CMC, so they're not usually played.
One other thing I find at fault with this deck is, with all the amount that they care about casting spells, I'm surprised there aren't any storm cards here, because there are quite a few cheap storm cards.
The commander selection is interesting to me as well. It's a lot of protection, but the deck still dies to board wipe or any sort of like a small damage spell because there's so many 1/1s that are really the way the deck's going to win.
Yes, exactly. Like they needed Lazotep plating or Mizium skin here to protect the board. Yeah, I think I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. It's got a lot of cool stuff in here. It just doesn't seem optimized.
Dragonshift also does not give haste, which makes it a bit more difficult to do it all in one turn. I'm gonna give this a 7.5.
I'm gonna give this deck a 5 just because I like the idea a lot, but I don't see how often the deck could actually pull it off.
Ruxa, Patient Professor, 2 green for a 4/4. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, return target creature card with no abilities from your graveyard to your hand. Creatures you control with no abilities get +1/+1. You may have creatures you control with no abilities assign their combat damage as though they weren't blocked. That is 5405, which also, it says it's $50, you know.
I'll allow it.
10 pieces of ramp and 33 lands. I feel like that's not enough ramp to support that few lands.
I'm going to show my hand a little bit here, but I love this deck. Like, I know this deck, it looks like a meme, but I've seen a deck like this played in my LGS, and it is no joke. The ability to have your vanilla creatures get pumped up and assign combat damage as though they weren't blocked is so deadly. Especially when, if you look at the boost package here, like they've got stuff like Colossification or Branchwood Armor or Aspect of the Hydra. Like, their vanilla creatures can hit hard and just wipe you out before you have a chance to actually figure out what happened.
This is actually really cool. I like the fact that they're taking, you know, quote unquote worthless creatures, 2 mana 2/2, 2 mana 3/2, etc., and making them work really well. This feels like the deck I threw together, you know, from my collection, just, you know, when I first started to play Magic. It's very nostalgic in a way.
And then the card draw here too is also insane, with like Garruk's Pack Leader, Garruk's Uprising, Greater Good, Keeper of Fables. Like, you're never gonna run out of cards when you're running this deck.
Yeah, this is amazing. I just wish it had a few more lands, honestly.
I think this deck captures the essence of Commander really, really well. It's a lot of cards that probably are just sitting in your binder and you're not going to play, but this deck finds a way to put them in a deck and actually make them work and be good. So I'm a huge fan of this deck.
No, I really like this deck. I'm giving it a 9.
I'm giving this a 10. Perfect score in my book.
I'm going to give this deck a 9.
That is a 28. That is in first place, which leaves one more deck. Odric, Lunarch Marshal. 3 and a white for a 3/3 legendary creature human soldier. At the beginning of each combat, creatures you control gain first strike until end of turn. If a creature you control has first strike, the same is true for flying, death touch, double strike, haste, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, menace, reach, skulk, trample, and vigilance. The official price for this one is $47.45. So it looks like this takes creatures that just have these keywords and throws them all in a deck so that it just spreads around. Then all your creatures are going to have tons of abilities.
It's a very simple enough deck. You play your keyword creatures and then they just spread the love. You know, I think that's often good enough, because like some of these things like Blink Dog here, it has double strike. Now everything you have has double strike. That's pretty scary.
Very simple, and it just doesn't have to be complicated. It does what it does and it does it well.
The only thing I have about this deck is it feels like it dips its toes into the life gain strategy but doesn't go all in. Now the deck probably will gain a lot of life, but there are cards like the Nykthos Paragon that don't provide any keywords but trigger off of life gain, which I just found to be an interesting include. It might wind up working when you're playing the deck, but on paper it sort of just stuck out to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good cards here. 34 creatures is a lot, and there's not really much we can do against board wipes. I don't think I see any protection in here, and there's also not very much draw.
I think this deck is very focused on aggro. It wants to win before your opponent has a chance to remove your stuff. And I think the creature spread here, it's pretty good at removing too much redundancy amongst keywords. Like almost everything does one thing or another so that you don't have just a bunch of creatures that all have the same keyword.
I feel like it's just trying to win and just attack and deal damage before you need to worry about drawing cards or before you need to worry about other people wrathing your board.
Maybe the creatures skew a little too much on the small side. Like you've got a lot of low mana creatures that have very small stats. So I don't know how effective that'll be if your game plan is to win fast.
I wonder if there's any good white like pump cards that could make this work better.
Yeah, maybe something like a Dictative Heliod, especially if you're playing effects that give things double strike. Having your entire board be super powerful could be really, really good.
Yeah, Dictative Heliod is great. I don't know, I like this deck. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10.
I agree. I think this deck seems pretty good at doing what it wants to do. It's pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of different abilities and a lot of good cards in white I think it utilizes well. I'd give this deck a 7.5.
I think I'm going to give this one a 7.5 for everything we said, but also because there's a few really cool inclusions like the Crystalline Giant or Ravnica at War that really goes in on what this deck is trying to do well.
That means that Quarantine, with their Ruxa, Patient Professor deck, has won.
Yeah, who says vanilla is boring?
Go subscribe to the Mana Confluence and Noctimoon Archives. Thanks for helping me with the video.
Thanks for having me as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.